everyone, and welcome to the Intuition Revolution. I'm your host, Kim Chestney, and today's guest is one of my all-time favorite people in the world, Jim Denova. Jim is the vice president of the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation and has provided almost $1 million worth of support for the applied intuition of creativity and its impact on global culture and innovation. Jim has a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh and over 30 years of philanthropic leadership experience. He speaks all over the world to help revolutionize our education system and raise awareness of the power of creativity to change our lives, our neighborhoods, our cities, and our world culture. Jim has been my partner in crime for over a decade. We've been doing this a long time. Yep. We have built the Create Festival together. We conducted 2 national creative research projects with Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Toronto. We co-founded the Co-Create Business Incubator and collaborated with innovators from all over the country to talk about this revolutionary intuitive shift that's happening in our culture today. So Jim really got my vision for bringing together the intuitive right-brainers with the tech and innovation communities, and truly became one of the biggest champions for this work in the country. So it is my supreme honor to have worked with such an esteemed change maker, and I'm beyond thrilled to have you here today, Jim. Welcome.
Good God. Thank you for that introduction, as inflated as it is. Much appreciated.
No, it's true. It's so true. I mean, you're so humble, and I think sometimes we get so caught up doing the work that we really forget how, the real big picture and the impact that you've had. I mean, if you really had an assessment of all the impact from your support and your vision that you've created in the world, I think we would be astounded to have that conversation. So,
well,
no humility necessary.
I will say one thing though, about philanthropy, because a lot of people think the best part of philanthropy is giving away money, and it's not. The best part of philanthropy is you get to travel and roam and meet the most interesting people, and then you invest in those people, and you're one of those people that make me look like a smart investor.
Aw, thanks.
True.
Well, I'll take that. I'll take that, because that's what it's all about, is doing this work, and we all rise together.
Right.
I mean, you really got, I said, you really got it. You were really an early adopter with all of this stuff, because when we started doing this stuff, people kind of thought we were nuts. People still don't get it. People were like art, intuition, creativity, how does that apply to life, and how is that going to change the world? And really in terms of radical intuition, art and creativity are just forms of applied intuition. That's kind of it's the root, right? We're learning to think from the other side of our brain, right? The innovative side of our right brains, instead of the traditional thinking left brain that we're used to, right? So it's just a paradigm shift. So what made you really see the light, so to speak, that creativity was this force of the future?
Well, I mean, there's 2 reasons why the work you were starting at the time was so appealing to me. And I didn't think about it in terms of right brain, left brain thinking, but in this regard, that I've always thought that real innovation, real invention comes from the cross-pollination of different sectors, right? So people who live in their own silo tend to regurgitate that which they know with people who know the same thing. But you started this whole thing by saying, if we can really introduce the leaders in technology with those of the arts, of the traditional creative sector, and see what gins up through that cross-pollination. And we didn't know where it was going to go.
Right.
I mean, this was not prescriptive investment on our part. This was a way of saying there's something here. And you were the force that sort of brought different sectors together, not all like-minded, and there were some controversies along the way, as you know.
A lot, actually.
But you really reflected that people had to leave their silos, step out of the domains that they knew well, and that they thought defined the world. And what you ended up creating with this whole sector, the creative industries network itself, was really sort of the outcome of, I'm going to use the word again, cross-pollination. People who had different skills saw the world differently and they came together. And that's where invention comes from. And it had a certain appeal to um, other initiatives around the world. So I'll never forget the group from England that said, we want to create an economic district around creativity and making. And they turned to you. I think that's testimony to what you were able to build. So the greatest attribute of what you built was that notion of mixing different ways of viewing the world, and it created something totally new out of that.
Like, I love that. And I think it was so funny because this whole thing, I 100% agree with you too, by the way. This whole idea of this whole process was such a process of discovery for us, right? We didn't have any idea what we were doing, right? We were just kind of like throwing stuff at the wall, see if it worked, trying this, just mashing these people up together, see what would happen. And, the first day when we did that, we did that art and technology exhibition, we didn't know. We didn't think like anyone, maybe like 50 people might show up maybe. And we ended up with 500 people breaking fire code, realizing that, oh my gosh, this is exciting. Like, people want more of this. It's a thing that no one's seen before. And it was so funny because I just look back on that, thinking like, I really had no idea what I was doing at that time. And it really plays into that idea that, if you know what you're doing, then, you're doing something wrong, because you should have that sense of discovery, right? You should have that sense of like, I need to try something new or experiment or whatever, right? And that worked out so well for us, because that's kind of was like our MO. We just fly off and talk to this person and see, what kind of chemistry we could create, and bringing together those different types of people who would never normally have conversations with each other, right?
But here's sort of an undergirding that I don't want you to take for granted. While you allowed it to be this open-ended sort of intersection for creativity, you created a stable medium, a forum that people knew they could come back to.
Right.
So the Create Festival was an annual event that celebrated this work. However, through the course of the year, you had different events that gave stability to the folks who were inspired by one meeting. They knew where they could go. It was a forum in the traditional Roman forum sense. It was the marketplace. There's a stability in that without dictating what people did.
Right.
So that's a delicate balance.
It totally is. And it reminds me, it reminds me of, when we did the study with University of Toronto and the Richard Florida group, and Carnegie Mellon was in on that one too. When we surveyed all of the businesses who are working in this field, and these creative businesses and artists and innovators and intuitives, and we looked at their businesses, and we came up with this. One of the coolest things that came out of that study was this statistical correlation of success with people's ability to collaborate with people different than them, right?
Correct.
Right. And so it was this idea, the more you partnered and worked with perspectives and training and backgrounds that were different than your own, that's where like this magic happens, right? So that's where all these new ideas happen. So it was really this kind of revolutionary approach, because we're always thinking, we're gonna like follow the trodden path and do what other people do and try and be like this CEO or that CEO, when really it's not about the upward path. It's about this chemistry of ideas that cook up out of this mashup.
That's right.
So what were like some of your favorite, we worked with a lot of people in that regards. We have a lot of different projects, a lot of creative people. What were some of your favorite people, or a good story from some of the people that we worked with? Are there any that you liked that stand out to you to share with folks?
People or events? Let me start with
either one.
I will start with the Entertainment Technology Center, Drew Davidson, Jess Tribus, the people that started this graduate program around animation, game design, simulators,
And we are actually interviewing Jesse Shell as part of this
and he
series
was
as well. And he
the
is
star.
crucial, one of the professors
And it
there.
may have been Jesse, or it may have been Drew, or someone else, or just Tribus, who talked about how do you build creativity, because it's not just about a school of game design, but they said every student has to come from a different discipline,
Yes.
and they all have to work in a team. So this university that's known for its computer science said we started with artists and writers, and then we added the coders. And that was an important lesson to learn.
Yes.
And at one of your presentations on entrepreneurship, where you were talking about how do you start a creative technology firm, the speaker said start with the artist. Never start with the technology, because that's the apparatus and the means of creativity. Start with the artist. And then when we went to San Francisco, it was quite clear some of the most advanced technology firms had artists in residence. Yep. And they were artists of traditional media. They were not digital artists necessarily, which was important.
Yes.
They too wanted to have the contrast by having a sculptor or a painter or a weaver. So that was important. I'm going to add one more, if I may. Mm-hmm. And because so much of what you wanted to address in Creative Industries Network is how to tap the entrepreneurs or the aspiring entrepreneurs who are artists and artisans now, but could be small business people later. And it was the Women's Entrepreneurship program here in Pittsburgh, run by Rebecca Harris.
Yep.
Who said, look, most of the women that we run into are artists, weavers, hobbyists. We can move them into a small business incubator exclusively on their creativity. So what you started spun off into a whole incubator around women. And it really helped with that, the gender divide in small businesses. And it was done through the arts. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had that sort of organized effort, or that, like I said before, you gave a forum for women who wanted to think about what they just saw as their crafts, not just, but they were avocational artists. Yep. Rebecca Harris jumped on it and said, we have a whole cluster of women who could be running their own businesses, out of their homes, in businesses, it doesn't matter. And that's where your program stimulated inspiration, among others. And frankly, that program is still going strong. Yep. The Women's Entrepreneurship Center at Chatham University has a crafters program every year. They bring in crafters, and they have a make shop that's almost exclusively built around fabric arts, because that tends to be the dominant medium for those women. So you've spun off a whole women's business incubator around.
Well, it's awesome. I mean, it's so good to, really see how, like we kind of started off saying in the beginning, how we plant these little seeds and then it just starts sprouting up everywhere. And then you start, seeing all these different people. When I joined the board and I was elected for Americans for the Arts, I started seeing people all around the country knew what we were doing, right? I did, strangers would come up to me like, oh my God, the stuff that you guys are doing in Pittsburgh is just unbelievable. Like how are you doing this? How are you supporting, something as ethereal and nebulous as creativity without asking for grants or handouts from the government? And I think that's one of the things that was so unique about what we were doing is and it really was empowerment, whether it was women's empowerment or, entrepreneurial empowerment in general, is teaching artists and intuitives how to take control of their businesses on their own and to raise money and to get supporters in the business industries, instead of like the old fashioned days when artists were just asking for grants and government support, right? Out of charity, right? So giving them the skills, and that's where Co-Create came in, right?
Correct. and not getting money from banks. I'm
Right.
being serious.
Yeah.
Artists and women historically have had a hard time getting bank loans.
Yep.
And this whole co-create model and the entrepreneurship training is changing that they're now representing as credible business and getting bank loans.
Yep.
So that was not a joke. I mean, it's just a part
Yeah.
of history.
No, you're so right. And it was stuff that, like, it wasn't top of awareness in those days when we started. Like, it wasn't something people were really addressing. It was just like everybody still kind of had like artists in the starving artist category, or, and then I started, working years ago when I started working with like Nathan Martin from Deep Local, who's like did this
Right.
amazing ad agency stuff with like all around the world and Nike, and started realizing like, hey, the creative directors and the fine art majors are going to be the new like MFAs. The BFA is the new MFA, right?
Right.
And Dan Pink and all that stuff, and realizing that there's a power shift happening. That, in the old days, there was certain, traditional means that you needed to be in a power role when it came to business. But now, having that creative vision and that genius and that innovation, like, that's the holy grail. And that's where intuition comes in, because intuition is what drives all of that.
But it also represents that it's a good investment for the more stodgy, staid sectors of society. So if I can just bring up one more example of something you did early on, was the Santa Fe Arts Festival.
Right.
So the Santa Fe Arts Festival, it was huge. I don't know how many people came, how many days. However, they allowed for these sort of talks and symposia embedded in the Arts Festival. You put a panel together, we were all part of, but it was you, it was the foundation, the banker, the artist, the museum, the college, the university, and you were the coordinator. And so the panel was able to say, here's how we all in our sectors get behind the artist to make art both economically contributory to the community, but also sustainable for the artist. Exactly. And I can remember how many people, it's like, how do you do that? And well, Kim asked us and we said, sure. And so, we did it with ease, but in many ways, it shows how glaringly distinct the world of banking, philanthropy, business, art, higher ed are detached.
Right.
You attached.
Right.
And it was a panel, and you remember how many people came up and talked?
Oh, it was packed. Standing room only.
But a lot of it had to do with the diversity of sectors.
Right.
All speaking in around one message.
Exactly.
That was one of my epiphanal moments.
Yeah, I agree. Same here. I mean, that's really the secret sauce, though, right? Is bringing together, like, just like we get back to that idea with the study, is bringing together all of those spokes on the wheel, right? Instead of kind of focusing on one or the other, and letting them have a conversation together, and like, oh my God, we're all into this. We all recognize this, so we can work together to sort of, levitate this and really explore what it means and what it means for the future. And then we talk a lot about this shift, and it really is the shift from the information age to this imagination age, right? We've been there, done that with data. Like, it's only going to get us so far. Pretty soon the artificial intelligence is going to like take over. We're going to be at the end of our rope when it comes to like our intellect, because machines are so smart and computers are so smart. So we have to fall back on that part of us that makes us human and makes us extraordinary. And that's where our intuition comes in. And I think the really smart people, even people like Einstein and Steve Jobs, got that immediately, right? They got that intuition is really that holy grail that's going to like accelerate us into this sort of new way of thinking of the world. So, what do you think? What do you think the future would look like? If as this sort of creativity and intuition becomes a more dominant force in society?
Well, can I comment on that through the education lens? Because
of course, because that's a big part of it. I mean, education is huge.
It is.
Where it all starts.
Your phrase, from information age to imagination age, sums up where we are heading with artificial intelligence and robotics. So we have this conundrum in education where we say, because of AI, because of big data analytics, because of robotics, the jobs of the future are going to be different. We don't know what they are, but we have to prepare our students for them. So the teacher that said, tell me again how I'm going about preparing students for jobs that we don't know exist. Thanks for that,
Yeah.
Obi-Wan. But I've had more than a few computer science people who have been deep their whole careers in coding and all versions of computer science and STEM learning say, we're beyond STEM education. We need to teach and we need to cultivate that which machines can't do. And pretty soon, everything that we've taught will be taken over by computers, by robots. So
Right.
it's not an acquisition as much as taking a closer look at those human attributes that will never be automated. And it is creativity and imagination and ethics and, you know, creating the agility to move and change when systems shift and change. And it's not the static technical skills. So most of the STEM people in the audience just gasp when they hear them say that. But honestly, I've had some hard-boiled computer scientists from CMU say, look, I was a math major and I took 4 years of math. I should have swapped that 4th advanced calculus class for one more philosophy class.
Right.
And that's an anecdote, but it's an important one because it means that we have to take like a greater cognizance of our humanness
Yes.
and cultivate that in the education
Yes.
system. I call it the resurrection of the liberal arts and humanities.
Yes.
And humanity defined not just by subjects, but by how we apply the technology that we have for the social good.
Right.
So,
And I mean, it really is a kind of reckoning. It's kind of like you know, there's this whole human side of us, this creative, intuitive, visionary side of us that has, let's be honest, been pretty much squelched by the education system, right? You know, we've been so we've overcompensated so much in our knowledge systems that we've just focused on STEM, and it's so important, right? Because technology is so important in where we are in our culture, but we're realizing that it's just half the battle, right? It's just the scales are tipped too far on the side of STEM, and we need to rebalance. And we don't need to cut art classes and philosophy classes and humanities. We actually need to have more of those so that we balance our brains, right? And we can complement all of this brilliant intellectual progress we have with this humanity, right? And to have that be the thing that is the vision for the future.
And in fact, my mantra, and people are tired of hearing it here, STEM learning is the means to master the humanities. So it's not the end of an educational journey, it's the intermediary step. What are you going to do with, you know, your STEM learning skills? I'm not dismissing the importance of learning to code any more than I am learning to write and read. But those are just tools for some eventuality. And that eventuality is the human application of that which we learned. You know?
Amen.
So that's where I love your phrase, information age to imagination age. How do we imagine we use not just the things we learn, but all of the other gifts of technology through artificial intelligence and robotics? They're not the adversary of the working men and women. They are the tools of the future.
Exactly.
Men and women.
Nothing to be afraid of, right? And either side, like the intuition isn't anything to be afraid of. The technology isn't anything to be afraid of. We embrace them both to become really fully who we are as human beings, right?
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap.
Well, thank you.
This has been great. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much Jim, it's always a blast talking with
No,
you.
I thank you. I
You're
never
like,
have an uninspiring conversation with you, Kim.
Aw. I know we always get going. We always have so much to talk about. So I love you, Jim. Thank
Love
you
you
so
too.
much. Thanks on behalf of all of us for being such a great supporter of this cause and for all of your wisdom that you've shared with us, the fountain of information we've shared today. It's been so great talking with you.
Until next time.
Until next time.